In the early 16th century, the Portuguese Empire was one of the leading maritime powers in the world. Following the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494, Portugal claimed the eastern part of the newly discovered lands in the Americas, which included modern-day Brazil. The first Portuguese explorers arrived in Brazil in 1500, led by Pedro Álvares Cabral. Initially, the Portuguese focused on extracting Brazilwood, a valuable source of red dye, from the dense coastal forests. By the mid-16th century, the Portuguese shifted their attention to the cultivation of sugar cane, recognizing its potential as a highly profitable cash crop. The first successful sugar plantations were established in the coastal regions of Brazil, particularly in Pernambuco and Bahia. The hot and humid climate, combined with fertile soil, made these regions ideal for sugarcane cultivation. Sugar production was labor-intensive and required a significant workforce. Initially, the Portuguese colonists attempted to enslave the indigenous populations to work on the plantations. However, this approach proved unsustainable due to the high mortality rates among the native people, who succumbed to diseases brought by the Europeans and the brutal working conditions. To meet the labor demands of the burgeoning sugar industry, the Portuguese turned to the transatlantic slave trade. The first African slaves were brought to Brazil in the early 16th century. Over the next few centuries, millions of Africans were forcibly transported to Brazil, primarily from West and Central Africa, through the infamous Middle Passage. The conditions on the slave ships were horrific, with many enslaved Africans dying en route due to overcrowding, disease, and mistreatment. Once in Brazil, enslaved Africans were subjected to grueling labor on the sugar plantations. The work was back-breaking and relentless, with long hours spent cutting, transporting, and processing sugar cane. The harsh conditions led to high mortality rates, necessitating a constant influx of new slaves to replace those who perished. The plantation owners, known as Senhores de Engenho, were typically wealthy Portuguese or Brazilian-born individuals who wielded significant power and influence. They oversaw vast estates that included not only the sugarcane fields, but also mills, engenhos, where the cane was crushed and processed into sugar. The Senhores de Engenho maintained strict control over their enslaved workforce, using a combination of coercion, punishment, and incentives to ensure productivity. The sugar industry became the backbone of the Brazilian economy, driving the colony's growth and wealth. Sugar from Brazil was in high demand in Europe, where it was considered a luxury item. The profits from sugar exports funded further expansion and development in Brazil, including the establishment of new towns and infrastructure. The influx of African slaves had profound cultural and social implications for Brazil. African traditions, languages, and religions blended with Portuguese and indigenous influences to create a unique and diverse cultural landscape. Enslaved Africans resisted their oppression in various ways, including maintaining their cultural practices, forming quilombos, communities of runaway slaves, and participating in revolts and uprisings. Throughout the centuries of slavery, there were numerous instances of resistance. Enslaved Africans resisted through acts of defiance, sabotage, and escape. Quilombos, such as the famous Quilombo dos Palmares, provided refuge and a means of resistance against the oppressive system. These communities often engaged in guerrilla warfare against colonial forces. The abolitionist movement gained momentum in the 19th century, both within Brazil and internationally. Enlightenment ideas, economic changes, and pressure from abolitionist groups in Europe and the Americas contributed to the growing calls for the end of slavery. In 1850, the Brazilian government passed the Eusébio de Queiroz law, which banned the importation of slaves. However, slavery persisted within Brazil until the signing of the Lei Áurea, Golden Law, on May 13, 1888, which officially abolished slavery in the country. The legacy of sugar plantations and slavery has left an indelible mark on Brazilian society. The descendants of enslaved Africans continue to face social and economic challenges, including systemic racism and inequality. However, African culture and heritage remain integral to Brazil's national identity, contributing to the country's vibrant music, dance, cuisine, and religious practices. The story of the Portuguese in Brazil, sugar plantations, and slavery is a complex and multifaceted narrative. It is a story of exploitation and brutality, but also of resilience and resistance. Understanding this history is essential for recognizing the profound impact it has had on shaping modern Brazil and acknowledging the enduring legacy of those who endured and resisted the horrors of slavery.